HOA Karen took my parking spot. Again and again. She laughed in my face when I complained. She mocked me when I called the HOA. And when I thought it couldn't get worse, she parked her Porsche right in front of my gate. That's when I made a decision. A decision so insane, so unforgettable, that the entire neighborhood still talks about it today. Because I didn't just fight back. I crushed her Porsche with a tank. But how did it all come to this? And what happened next will shock you. Welcome back to HOA Max Stories, my friends, where real HOA nightmares turn into unbelievable tales. My name is Michael. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood here in Texas, and I've been dealing with HOA drama for years. I'm just an ordinary homeowner, but in this story, things went from ordinary to extraordinary real fast. Before we dive in, let me ask you, kindly, like a good neighbor, if you enjoy these HOA stories, hit that subscribe button. Think of it like joining us for coffee on the porch every story, every week. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know if you're my neighbor across the street, or listening all the way from another state. I had no idea that one single parking spot could change my life so much. But in my neighborhood, with our HOA rules, nothing is ever simple. See, I've lived here for years. It's a quiet street in Texas, the kind of place where you wave to your neighbor, borrow sugar from the lady next door, and everybody knows which house has the best Christmas lights. It was good living here. Peaceful. Until she moved in. The neighbors already had a name for her. The Karen. She was loud, demanding, and always right. At least in her own mind. She would complain about lawn heights, trash bins not rolled in quick enough, and even about kids riding bikes too fast. But none of it, was as bad as what she did to me. She stole my parking spot. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. A new neighbor, maybe she didn't know. My driveway is long, and right in front of it there's a curb space that I always used for my extra car or when friends came over. Everybody on the street knew that was my spot. One evening, I came home from work, tired, hot, ready for dinner, and there it was. A shiny white Porsche 911, parked right in my spot. I looked around, confused. Whose car was this? Why here? And then I saw her. She came out with her little dog, sunglasses on even though it was almost dark. She looked at me, smiled, not the friendly kind, but the smirk of someone who already knew what she had done. I said politely, "Excuse me, that's actually where I park. Could you move your car?" She tilted her head, gave me that fake laugh, and said, "It's public property. I can park wherever I like." I was stunned. No one had ever done this before. So I tried again. I live here. This is my space. All my neighbors respect that. And then she said it. The words that lit a fire inside me. Call the HOA if you don't like it. That was the start of it all. The next day, she did it again. Same spot. Same Porsche. I went to the HOA board, thinking they'd help. After all, what else are HOA fees for? I explained everything. The board members looked at me, nodded, and said they'd look into it. But instead of helping, they turned on me. A week later, I got a letter. A fine. For harassing another resident. Can you believe that? I was the victim, and they fined me. I couldn't believe how unfair it was. The more I fought, the worse it got. Karen started doing it on purpose. She'd park there every day, strutting back to her house with that smile, like she had one. Sometimes she'd even wave at me, like she was mocking me. I tried being patient. I tried ignoring it. But it ate at me, every single day. I'd look out the window and there it was, her Porsche sitting where my car should be. Neighbors started whispering. Some laughed, saying maybe the spot belonged to her now. Others told me, just let it go, it's not worth it. But it was worth it. It was about respect. It was about standing up to someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her. One night, I came home late. Her Porsche was in my spot again. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at it. My hands on the steering wheel, my teeth clenched. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to let Karen win. What I didn't know yet was how far I'd go to keep that promise. But deep inside, a wild idea was already forming, something so crazy, so unbelievable, that even I didn't think I'd go through with it. Still, the thought kept coming back. If she wanted to act untouchable, if she wanted to rub her Porsche in my face, then maybe it was time to show her just how crushable it really was. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something, neighbor to neighbor. Backhand index pointing right. If someone kept stealing your parking spot day after day, even after you asked nicely, what would you do? Would you keep calling the HOA, or would you take matters into your own hands? Tell me in the comments, because I really want to know how far you would go. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her Porsche sitting there in my spot. I felt powerless, and I hated that feeling. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Made myself coffee, looked out the window, and there it was again. That shiny white Porsche. Almost like it was smiling at me. Mocking me. I went outside, stood there for a moment. And just as I thought, maybe I'll wait till she comes out, talk to her one more time, the door swung open. Out she came, sunglasses on, little dog barking at me. She looked right at me and said, "Problem again? You should learn to share." That was it. I was done being polite. I told her, "This isn't sharing. This is stealing. You've got your own driveway. Use it." She smirked and said, "Driveways are for guests. Mine's too pretty to park on." Then she laughed, walked away, leaving me standing there like an idiot. I went straight back inside and called the HOA office. Told them everything again. They promised to review the situation. Hours later, a knock on my door. I opened it, and there stood an HOA board member, clipboard in hand. He didn't come to help. He came to warn me. "Sir, we've received complaints that you've been harassing your neighbor. We'll need you to stop confronting her directly. If it continues, fines will increase." My jaw nearly dropped. I said, "She's parking in my spot. She's the one causing problems." But the man just shrugged, wrote something down, and walked away. I stood there shaking, angry, boiling inside. Not only was Karen laughing at me, now the HOA was protecting her. That week, it got worse. Not only did she keep parking in my spot, she started telling people on the street that I was unstable. She'd wave to neighbors with a smile, then whisper, "He's obsessed with me." Poor man. Some neighbors started looking at me differently. Others just avoided the drama. But I felt alone. Trapped. One evening, when I came home from work, I saw something that made my blood boil. She was leaning against her Porsche, sipping a drink, like it was a victory throne. And when I pulled up, she lifted her glass to me and said, "Nice night to park in my spot." I wanted to scream. But instead, I just drove around the block, parked far away, and walked home in silence. That night, I poured myself a drink, sat at the kitchen table, and thought about every single thing I had done so far. Talking to her, talking to the HOA, filing complaints, none of it worked. That's when a memory hit me. Years ago, I had met a man at a military collector's show. He owned a piece of history, a real tank. At the time, I thought it was crazy, who buys a tank? But now, the idea didn't feel so crazy. I laughed to myself. What if? I whispered. What if I showed her she wasn't untouchable? What if her Porsche wasn't as special as she thought? The idea grew in my head. Like a fire spreading. The more she pushed me, the more the HOA ignored me, the more I wanted to prove a point. But I couldn't just call the man and ask for a tank. I needed a reason. A story. Something to justify it. So I told him I wanted to rent it for a veterans parade. A one-day use. He agreed. The moment I heard yes, my heart pounded. My hands shook. Because I knew deep down. I wasn't planning to show that tank in a parade. I was planning something much bigger. That night, I lay awake, imagining the look on Karen's face. Her Porsche, crushed. Her pride, gone. For once, the neighborhood wouldn't laugh at me, they'd cheer for me. But part of me still hesitated. Could I really do it? Could I take it that far? Wouldn't that make me the villain instead of her? The answer came the next morning. I woke up, looked outside, and of course, her Porsche was there again. Right in front of my gate, blocking me completely. I couldn't even drive out. That was it. Decision made. I made the call. Arranged the delivery. Within days, I'd have something parked in my yard that no HOA, no Karen, no Porsche could ever ignore. When the day came, I stood outside waiting. Neighbors gathered, curious. They thought maybe I was getting construction equipment or a new RV. But when the flatbed truck arrived, carrying that massive green beast, jaws dropped. It was a tank. A real tank. Heavy, loud, impossible to ignore. The driver looked at me and said, "Where do you want it?" I pointed right at my driveway and said, "Right here." Neighbors gasped. Some laughed nervously. Karen peeked through her blinds, her eyes wide. For the first time, she looked worried. The tank sat there, silent but powerful. And in that moment, for the first time in months, I felt free. I didn't even touch it that night. I just let it sit there, like a warning. A promise. And every time I glanced at her house, I saw her blinds twitching. She was watching. She knew. The question was no longer if, but when. And when that moment came, it would be something no one in this neighborhood would ever forget. Backhand index pointing right, but let me ask you this. If you were in my shoes, would you actually go through with it? Would you roll the tank over her Porsche, or would you stop yourself at the last second? The tank sitting in my driveway was like a silent beast. Neighbors walked by slowly, some shaking their heads, some laughing nervously, but no one dared to say anything to my face. The whole street felt different, heavier, tense. And Karen, oh, Karen. She tried to act normal, but I could see it in her eyes. That spark of arrogance wasn't as bright anymore. She'd glance at the tank, then quickly look away, pretending it wasn't there. But I knew she felt it. The balance had shifted. The first few days, she didn't park in my spot. Maybe she thought it was too risky. Maybe she thought the tank was just a showpiece. For a moment, I thought the battle was over. Maybe I had finally won. But no. Karen wasn't the type to back down for long. It was a Saturday morning when I saw it. Her Porsche, back in front of my gate. Like nothing had changed. Like the tank didn't even exist. I walked outside, slow and calm. My neighbors were already watching, waiting to see what I would do. Karen was in her yard, watering flowers, pretending to be innocent. I called out, "Karen, move your car." She turned, sunglasses on, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or what? You gonna run it over with your toy tank?" People around chuckled nervously. She smirked, proud of herself, proud of her words. She thought she had won again. But inside me, something snapped. All the weeks of frustration. The fines. The laughter. The whispers. The disrespect. It all boiled up at once. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply turned, climbed up onto that tank, and sat down on top. The neighborhood went silent. Every eye was on me. Karen's smirk froze. I gripped the controls, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from power. The roar of the engine filled the air as the tank came alive. It was like waking up a dragon. Karen shouted, "You wouldn't dare." But even she didn't sound sure. I steered forward, slowly, the tank's massive tread rolling toward her Porsche. The ground shook. Glass windows rattled. The air buzzed with electricity. And then, crunch. The Porsche's bumper crumpled like paper under the first touch. Karen screamed. Neighbors gasped. And I kept going. The tank rolled up, metal grinding metal, glass shattering, alarms blaring. The once proud Porsche folded like a toy. The windshield exploded into 1,000 shards. The hood bent, twisted, crushed beneath the weight. The neighborhood erupted in noise. Some people screamed. Some cheered. Some pulled out their phones, recording every second. And Karen, she lost it. She screamed my name, shouted, "You're insane. That's my car. That's my Porsche." Her little dog barked like crazy, tugging at its leash. But me? I felt calm. For the first time in months, I felt like justice had finally been served. I stopped the tank right in the middle of her Porsche, treads resting on the destroyed metal. I turned off the engine. Silence fell over the street, except for the crackle of crushed glass settling. I stood up on top of the tank and looked straight at her. She was shaking, red-faced, fists clenched. And for once, she had no words. The neighbors stared at me, wide-eyed, not sure if they should clap or run. One old man down the street muttered, "About time someone put her in her place." Another whispered, "He's going to jail for sure." Karen stormed toward the wreck, pointing at me like a child tattling to a teacher. "You'll pay for this. The HOA will bury you. You're finished." But for once, her words didn't scare me. I climbed down from the tank, walked past her Porsche, or what was left of it, and said, "No, Karen. This time, you're the one who's finished." The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. Phones were buzzing. Videos were already online, no doubt. And Karen, she looked smaller than ever before. The HOA board members rushed down the street not long after, shouting, trying to calm the chaos. They pointed fingers at me, wrote notes, threatened fines bigger than I had ever seen. But the neighbors, they weren't siding with Karen anymore. Not after seeing the truth with their own eyes. For once, the board didn't look so confident. Their power didn't feel so strong. Because the people weren't laughing at me anymore. They were whispering about Karen. I looked around at all of them, then at the crushed Porsche under my tank, and I realized something. Respect isn't given. It's taken. And that day, I had taken it back. But deep inside, even as I stood tall, a question lingered. Had I gone too far? Had I crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed? Because one thing was certain, nothing in our neighborhood would ever be the same again. Backhand index pointing right. Tell me honestly, if you were standing there that day, would you have cheered for me, or would you have called the cops? The smell of burnt rubber and broken glass still lingered in the air as I stood there, tank behind me, Porsche flattened beneath its weight. The neighborhood was buzzing like a hornet's nest. People were whispering, gasping, some even laughing nervously. But through it all, Karen's scream cut the loudest. She was hysterical. She ran around the wreck, waving her arms, her voice shrill and sharp. "My Porsche! Do you know how much this costs? You lunatic! I'll ruin you for this." I just stood there, calm. My heart was racing, but I didn't let it show. Because deep inside, I knew the moment I crushed that Porsche, there was no turning back. The HOA board members arrived minutes later, storming down the street like angry cops. Clipboards in hand, phones pressed to their ears, already calling their lawyers, maybe even the police. They didn't even glance at Karen's wrecked car. Their eyes locked on me. One of them shouted, "You've destroyed private property. You're done. We'll fine you so hard you'll never recover." Another pointed at me and said, "You're a danger to this community." I wanted to laugh. A danger? No. I was a man pushed too far. Karen jumped in, tears rolling down her face. "He's obsessed with me. He's been harassing me for weeks. And now look what he's done." Her voice cracked, but it wasn't sadness. It was rage. The board nodded, scribbling notes, ready to bury me under paperwork. But then, something happened I didn't expect. A voice rose from the crowd. Enough. It was Mr. Henderson, my neighbor across the street. An old man, quiet, never involved in drama. But today, his voice shook with anger. He pointed at Karen and said, "You've been parking in his spot for months. We all saw it. You laughed at him, mocked him, called the HOA on him. And now you want us to feel sorry for you? No. You brought this on yourself." The crowd murmured. Another neighbor spoke up. He asked nicely, over and over. "We all told you it wasn't right. But you kept doing it. Maybe now you'll think twice." Karen's jaw dropped. She spun in circles, looking at everyone. "You can't side with him. He destroyed my Porsche." But the tide had turned. For the first time, people weren't afraid to say the truth. The HOA board looked uncomfortable, shifting on their feet, realizing this wasn't as simple as they thought. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "You want to find me? Go ahead. But everyone here knows what happened. Everyone knows what pushed me to this point. She thought the rules didn't apply to her, and you all let her get away with it. Not anymore." Karen shrieked, pointing at me like a child throwing a tantrum. "You'll regret this. I'll sue you. I'll take everything you have." But her words didn't have the same power anymore. Not when the neighbors stood behind me. Not when her precious Porsche was nothing but a pile of twisted metal. Police arrived not long after. They stepped out of their cars, looked at the tank, then at the crushed Porsche, and for a moment, even they seemed speechless. One officer muttered, "I've seen a lot of things, but never this." They questioned me, wrote their reports, took statements. Karen screamed at them, demanding my arrest. But the neighbors told the truth. They spoke of her arrogance, her constant parking, her harassment. The officers listened quietly. Finally, one of them pulled me aside and said, "Look, this is going to be messy. But with the witnesses backing you up, it won't be as easy for her as she thinks. Just be ready. Lawyers will get involved." I nodded. I was ready. That night, the neighborhood was silent. People peeked out their windows, curious, nervous, maybe even scared. And there I was, sitting on the tank in the moonlight, watching over the wreck like a king over his battlefield. Karen didn't come outside again. Her blinds stayed shut. For the first time since she moved in, her arrogance was gone. But I knew it wasn't over. People like her don't just give up. She'd fight back, claw, threaten, do anything to get her power back. And the HOA, they weren't done either. They'd look for ways to punish me, to protect themselves, to keep control. Still, I had something they didn't. I had the respect of my neighbors now. I had shown them that you don't always have to bow down to bullies. Sometimes, you fight back. I went to bed late that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What would tomorrow bring? Lawsuits? More HOA letters? Maybe worse? But at least I wasn't the one being laughed at anymore. The next morning, I woke up early, stepped outside, and looked at the wreck still sitting there. The sun reflected off the crushed metal, the broken glass glittering like ice on the street. It was ugly. But to me, it was beautiful. Because it wasn't just a destroyed Porsche. It was a message. A message that said, "I'm not your victim anymore." And as I stood there, neighbors slowly walking by, nodding at me, some even smiling, I realized something. That moment, that wreck, had changed everything. But still, deep inside, a question haunted me. Did I just win, or had I started a war I couldn't finish? Backhand index pointing right. Tell me, friends, if you were in my shoes, standing there the next morning, would you feel proud of what you did, or would you feel afraid of what was coming next? The wreck sat in front of my house like a monument, a crushed reminder of what happens when arrogance meets resistance. For a brief moment, life felt lighter. People weren't laughing at me anymore. Neighbors nodded as they passed, some even gave me thumbs up. But I knew Karen. She wasn't going to disappear quietly. 2 days later, the storm began. I was sitting in my kitchen when I heard a loud knock on the door. I opened it to find a man in a suit holding a thick envelope. His words were cold and sharp. "You've been served." Inside was a lawsuit. Karen was suing me for damages, emotional distress, harassment, destruction of property. The number she demanded was insane, more than my house was even worth. I sat down, reading page after page, my hands trembling. She wasn't just angry. She wanted to ruin me. That afternoon, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, of course. But word spread fast. By evening, a letter showed up in my mailbox, a motion to remove me from the neighborhood entirely. They were trying to evict me from my own home. The rage boiled inside me again. She had parked in my spot, mocked me, laughed at me, and now, after everything, she wanted to take away my home? I couldn't let it happen. I called a lawyer, one recommended by Mr. Henderson across the street. A tough, no-nonsense man who had dealt with HOA cases before. He looked at the lawsuit, laughed, and said, "Half of this won't stick. But make no mistake, she's dangerous. She'll drag this out, bleed you dry if she can." The days that followed felt like war. Karen strutted around with a fake limp, pretending she had been traumatized. She showed neighbors the lawsuit, playing the victim. Some people bought it, others didn't. The HOA doubled down, sending inspectors to my yard every day, looking for the smallest violation. They fined me for grass too long. They fined me for improper trash bin placement. They even fined me for having the tank parked in the driveway. Each fine felt like another punch in the gut. They wanted me gone, and they didn't care how. But I didn't back down. I fought every fine, appealed every letter, showed up at every meeting. And every time they tried to twist the story, the neighbors stood up. They told the truth. They described Karen's behavior, her constant parking, her arrogance. Slowly, the board started losing its grip. Karen hated it. She'd glare at me across the street, her face twisted with anger. Sometimes, she'd shout, "This isn't over." Other times, she'd stand on her porch, filming me with her phone, waiting for me to slip up. The pressure was crushing, but strangely, I felt stronger than before. The tank had done more than flatten her Porsche. It had flattened the fear inside me. One evening, I came home to find a note taped to my door. No signature. Just words written in messy black ink. "Leave now, before it gets worse." For a moment, I felt a chill. Was it Karen? The HOA? Someone else who thought I had gone too far? I showed the note to my lawyer. He shook his head. "They're trying to scare you. Don't let them. That's what bullies do." So I didn't. Instead, I doubled down. I cleaned up my yard, fixed every tiny thing they could complain about, and made sure my house looked better than ever. I showed up at HOA meetings dressed sharp, speaking calm, while Karen ranted and shouted like a madwoman. Slowly, the board began to see who looked more reasonable. But Karen wasn't done. One night, around midnight, I heard a noise outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw her, sneaking across my yard. She had a spray can in her hand. Before I could react, she sprayed big red letters across my garage door, "Psycho." I rushed outside, shouting, and she bolted like a thief, her little dog barking behind her. I called the police. This time, they didn't brush it off. They took pictures, filed a report. Karen screamed at them, claiming I was framing her, but the paint on her hands told the truth. That was the beginning of her downfall. The neighbors saw her mask slip. They saw her for what she really was. The woman who once strutted around like a queen was now being whispered about like a criminal. Still, the lawsuit loomed. Court dates were set. Lawyers prepared. And every day, tension grew heavier. I'd walk outside and feel the stares, the whispers, the cameras. My life had become a show, a drama everyone wanted to watch unfold. And deep down, I wondered how it would end. Would the HOA crush me with their power? Would Karen win in court? Or would the truth finally be enough to set me free? At night, lying in bed, I thought about the tank, about the crushed Porsche, about that single moment when I decided to fight back. Had it saved me, or had it doomed me? The questions spun in my head, louder than the silence of the night. Backhand index pointing right, and let me ask you this: if your neighbor and your HOA both turned against you, would you stand your ground like I did, or would you pack up and leave before things got worse? The lawsuit date came faster than I expected. Weeks of tension, endless HOA letters, and Karen's constant glares had all been leading to this moment. The courthouse was packed that morning. Neighbors came to watch. Some to support me, others out of pure curiosity. After all, who wouldn't want to see the man who crushed a Porsche with a tank face off against the queen of HOA drama? I sat at the defendant's table, my lawyer calm and collected beside me. Across the room, Karen sat with her attorney, dressed in expensive clothes, looking like she had just stepped out of a magazine. But her eyes burned with hatred. She didn't look scared. She looked certain she would win. The judge walked in, stern and serious, and the trial began. Karen's lawyer went first. He painted me as a violent man, unstable, dangerous. He waved pictures of the Porsche in front of the jury, showed the spray-painted psycho on my garage, conveniently leaving out who had written it. He called me a menace, a threat to the neighborhood. Karen took the stand. She cried, dabbed her eyes with tissues, told stories of how she felt unsafe living near me. She claimed I had harassed her for months, that I had stalked her, yelled at her, even followed her around. Lies, all of it. But she told them with the confidence of someone who had been lying her whole life. I clenched my fists under the table, my lawyer whispering, "Stay calm. Our turn is coming." And then it did. He stood, slow and steady, and began to unravel her web. He called neighbor after neighbor to the stand. Mr. Henderson spoke first, his voice firm, unwavering. He told the court how Karen had parked in my spot for months, how she laughed at me, mocked me, dared me to call the HOA. Then came others. One by one, they testified about her arrogance, her constant violations, her cruelty. They spoke of the fines I had received, the unfair treatment from the HOA, the way Karen had twisted everything to look like the victim. Finally, my lawyer held up photos of my garage, the word psycho in red paint. He asked Karen if she recognized the handwriting. She denied it, of course. But then the officer who had taken the report testified. He had seen the red paint on her hands that night. He told the court exactly what had happened. Karen's face turned pale. For the first time, she didn't look so confident. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, heart pounding, voice shaking but strong. I told them everything. From the first day I saw her Porsche in my spot, to the endless fines, to the tank. I didn't hide from it. I admitted I had crushed her car. I told them why. It wasn't about the car, I said. It was about respect. I asked nicely, over and over. I followed the rules. I went to the board. And every time, I was ignored. Every time, she laughed. Every time, I was made to feel small. I'm not proud of what I did, but I won't pretend it wasn't the only way to make it stop. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward, listening. When I finished, my lawyer placed his hand on my shoulder. He whispered, "You just won them over." The jury deliberated for hours. When they returned, the verdict was clear. The majority of Karen's claims were thrown out. The harassment, the emotional distress, the inflated damages, gone. She was awarded only the value of the destroyed Porsche, nothing more. And even that, my lawyer assured me, could be negotiated down. Karen exploded. She screamed at the judge, at me, at the jury. Security had to escort her out as she shouted, "This isn't over. You'll pay for this." But everyone in that room knew it was over. The HOA tried to distance themselves from her after that. The board members who had defended her started resigning, one by one, under pressure from the neighborhood. The community had seen the truth, and they weren't willing to be ruled by fear anymore. Karen became a shadow. She stopped showing her face outside. Her arrogance was gone, replaced with silence. Some said she was planning to move. Others said she was too ashamed. Either way, she wasn't the queen of the neighborhood anymore. And me? I felt a strange calm. For the first time in months, I could park in my spot without looking over my shoulder. I could step outside without feeling mocked. The tank had come and gone, but the message it left behind still lingered. Still, late at night, when the street was quiet, I sometimes asked myself, had I done the right thing? Or had I just started a chain of events that no one could truly control? The truth is, once you crush a Porsche with a tank, life never goes back to normal. Backhand index pointing right. So tell me, if the jury had been you, sitting there listening to my story, would you have punished me for what I did, or would you have let me walk free? The days after the verdict felt unreal. For the first time in a long time, I could walk outside without feeling like a criminal in my own neighborhood. The tank was gone, the Porsche was gone, and for a moment, it almost felt like life was back to normal. But it wasn't. The wreck might have been cleared away, but the memory of it lingered like a scar on the street. Every neighbor who passed that spot remembered exactly what had happened there. Every time Karen peeked out from behind her blinds, people whispered. The queen of the block had been dethroned, and I was the one who had done it. At first, I thought she'd pack up and leave. That seemed like the obvious ending. But no. Karen wasn't the type to vanish quietly. She stayed. Her Porsche was gone, but soon after, she bought another car, not as flashy, not as proud, but enough to keep her moving. A black SUV. And though she didn't park in my spot anymore, she found new ways to remind me she was still around. Sometimes she'd stand on her porch and just stare at me, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Other times, she'd send little notes through the HOA, subtle digs about community safety or unstable residents. She wanted me to know she hadn't forgiven, hadn't forgotten. But something had changed. The neighbors didn't fear her anymore. They rolled their eyes when she spoke. They laughed behind her back. The HOA board had been shaken, new members were voted in, and suddenly the rules didn't feel like chains around our necks anymore. People started standing up for themselves. And in a strange way, I had become something of a legend. Kids whispered about the man with the tank. Adults gave me nods of respect. Even strangers passing through the neighborhood slowed down, pointing at my house, telling stories they'd heard online. The video of the Porsche being crushed had spread farther than I ever imagined. Millions of views. Headlines. Memes. I had gone from being mocked to being infamous. But fame is a tricky thing. Some people admired me. Others feared me. And some wanted to challenge me. A few weeks later, I found a flyer taped to my mailbox. It was from another HOA in a nearby town. Someone there wrote, "We wish we had a man like you. Our HOA is out of control too." I didn't know whether to laugh or shake my head. Was I a hero now? Or just a cautionary tale? Still, I couldn't deny the change in myself. I walked taller. I spoke louder. The fear that once chained me down was gone. Because once you've driven a tank over a Porsche, there's no going back to being the quiet neighbor who lets things slide. But deep down, I wondered, had I gone too far? One night, as I sat on my porch sipping a drink, Mr. Henderson came over. The old man looked at me with those wise eyes of his and said, "You did what none of us dared to do. You stood up. But remember this, sometimes, when you fight fire with fire, you risk burning down the whole street." His words stuck with me. Because while I had won the battle, I wasn't sure what I had started. The HOA was weaker now, yes, but in its place, something new was growing. Neighbors were louder, bolder, less willing to compromise. Arguments flared more often. It was as if the tank hadn't just crushed a Porsche, it had crushed the very idea of peace. And Karen? She didn't give up completely. She became quieter, but more cunning. Rumors spread that she was appealing the case. Others said she was saving up for revenge, waiting for the right moment. Every time I saw her blinds twitch, I wondered what she was planning. Yet despite the whispers, despite the tension, I couldn't shake one simple truth: I had no regrets. Because for months, I had been ignored, mocked, dismissed. And in one unforgettable moment, I took all of that back. The price was high. The fight was messy. The neighborhood would never be the same. But sometimes, change comes at a cost. Now, when I walk down my street, people still ask me about it. They ask, would you do it again? They ask, was it worth it? And I always pause, smile a little, and say, you tell me. Because maybe this story isn't just mine anymore. Maybe it belongs to every person who's ever been pushed too far, ignored by people in power, mocked by someone who thought they were untouchable. Maybe it belongs to you too. Backhand index pointing right. So tell me honestly, if you had the chance to crush your biggest problem the way I crushed that Porsche, would you do it? Or would you hold back, knowing the world would never look at you the same again?